I've been staring out the bus window for the 15th hour in a row. The scenery changes, but the feeling of unease remains the same. Pennsylvania is long gone, and ahead lies Idaho, with its mountain ranges and unfamiliar roads. I'm on my way to see my son, who doesn't even know I'm coming, or rather, my son and his wife, the same one who stole him from me. The travel bag I've placed on the seat next to me is no longer an annoyance to the other passengers. Most have gotten off at previous stops, and now the cabin is half empty. The driver announces another break, but I don't get up. I sit, smoothing the creases in my navy blue skirt and thinking about what I'll say to Garrett when I see him. "Hey, son, thought I'd stop by for a housewarming party." And then what? Will he hug me or pretend he's happy to see me? Or maybe he'll just shut the door in my face. It's been 3 years since he married that Merritt. 3 years since my only son started to drift away from me. First, the calls became less frequent, then shorter, and in the last 6 months, he stopped calling first altogether. I dialed his number once a week, listened to the routine answers about life, and realized that a wall was growing between us. A wall named Merritt Wilder, now Merritt Hammond. I found out about the new house by accident. Betty Caulfield, our neighbor from Pittsburgh, called one day and casually mentioned, "Your Garrett seems to be doing well. He bought a house in Idaho Falls, a house that a lot of people can't afford." I didn't believe it at first, but then I sat down at my computer and found Merritt's social media page. And there was a photo of my son standing in front of a 2-story house, holding the keys, and next to this woman in an embrace with him. The caption read, "Finally, a nest of my own. New home dreams come true." And not a word about the mother not even knowing. Not a hint that I should have been invited to the housewarming party. I worked as a merchandiser at Macy's for 37 years. I oversaw deliveries, checked the quality of merchandise, kept the warehouse in order. I learned to notice every little thing, every discrepancy. And now it's a habit I can't get out of. I see inconsistencies in the way my son behaves around me. This isn't my Garrett. It's some other person I don't know. "May I sit down?" A voice pulls me out of my thoughts. A woman about my age stands across from me, a large bead around her neck and a heavy bag in her hand. "Yes, of course," I answer, putting my bag on the top shelf. "How far are you traveling?" she asks, settling into the chair. "To Idaho Falls, to see my son," I said, though I didn't usually like talking to strangers. "What a coincidence. I'm there too to see my daughter. My name is Eunice Prentice." "Doris Hammond," I introduce myself. Eunice proves to be quite chatty. She tells me her daughter's been living in Idaho Falls for 5 years, married to an engineer, raising 2 kids. "How long has your son been there?" she asks. "He moved there recently. He bought a house," I say, trying to make my voice sound proud. "Is it a big house?" "2 stories," I shrug, as if it were nothing. "I'm going to a housewarming party." It's a lie, but it's too humiliating to admit I wasn't invited. "How nice!" Eunice exclaims. "I'm having a housewarming party soon, too. My daughter and son-in-law bought me a little house near them. They say it's time to move closer to them so I can see my grandchildren every day." I nod, but something inside clenches. I don't have grandchildren. Garrett and Merritt have been married for 3 years, but they still don't have children. "Do you have grandchildren?" Eunice asks, as if she's read my mind. "Not yet," I answer dryly. "They decided to wait. Are you and your son close? Do you see him often?" "Of course," I lie again. "It's just that he has a lot of work. He's an engineer at the hydroelectric plant. It's a very important position." Eunice nods understandingly, and I suddenly feel the need to talk more, to tell someone about what's been building up inside. "Garrett and I have always been very close," I continue, "especially after his father died. It was when Garrett was only 15. James, my husband, died of a heart attack right on the job. I was left alone with a teenager in my arms, unsupported, but we made it through. I worked as a merchandise clerk for a large department store, and we had enough to live on. Eunice shakes her head sympathetically, and it cheers me up. Garrett was such a good boy. He studied hard, helped around the house. He went to engineering college, just like his father had dreamed. I always knew he'd go far, and now he has a great job, a house of his own. That sounds wonderful, says Eunice. You must be very proud of him. Yes, I am, I agree, except that I stopped talking, not knowing if I should go on. Just what? Eunice nudges me gently. His wife, I sigh. I think she's trying to turn him against me. Ever since they've been married, he's been so distant. He used to call every day, but now I even heard about the new house from my neighbor. Eunice looks at me sympathetically, but there's something else in her gaze, something akin to an appraisal. You know, Doris, sometimes young couples need space, she says gently. My daughter was a little aloof for the first time after the wedding, too. But I realized that she and her husband are building their own lives, and I have to respect their boundaries. Boundaries? I can feel the irritation rising in me. What other boundaries between a mother and her son? I raised him. I gave him everything I could. And now I'm supposed to stand by and watch some woman take him away from me? Eunice looks away, and I realize I've said too much. But I can't stop now. That Merritt. She always looks at me like I'm a nuisance. When I visited them for Christmas 2 years ago, she barely spoke to me, and then I heard her complaining on the phone to a friend that I was staying over 3 days longer than planned, as if I didn't have the right to stay with my own son. Maybe she had some plans, Eunice suggests, or a job. She's a dispatcher for the emergency services, I interrupt. Just a regular shift job, nothing special. Eunice is silent for a while, then asks, Does your son know you're coming? I turn away to the window. Non bade. I want to surprise him. Oh, is all Eunice says. And in that short sound I hear everything. Doubt, disapproval, pity. You don't understand, I say in a quieter voice. Garrett has always been happy to see me. Always. Before her. Eunice nods, but I can see she's not on my side. No one is on my side, not even my own son. We fall silent. Eunice takes out a book and plunges into reading, and I look out the window again. Outside the window, fields, small towns, forests, farther and farther away from the house that has long since ceased to be home. Ever since Garrett left to go to school and then moved to another state, my apartment in Pittsburgh has become just a place where I sleep and eat. My thoughts return to how Garrett has changed since meeting Merritt. They met at some corporate event 5 years ago. Merritt had just gotten a job with the emergency services, and Garrett was already working at the hydroelectric plant. When he brought her to meet me, I sensed something wrong. She was too independent, too confident, not like my quiet, compliant Garrett. Mom, this is Merritt, he said then, and there was so much pride in his voice, like he was representing a celebrity. And she stood beside me, short, with a short haircut and piercing green eyes, and looked at me appraisingly. Nice to meet you, Mrs. Hammond, she said, extending her hand. Not Mother, not Doris, but Mrs. Hammond. From the beginning, she had marked the distance between us. And then Garrett started to change. He began to speak his mind where he'd agreed with me before, stopped asking for advice before every big decision, bought a new car without consulting me, changed jobs, and then he announced that he and Merritt were getting married. It was a small wedding. Garrett wanted something private, just for the family. So it was just me and a couple of distant relatives. But Merritt's side was full of people, her parents, her sister, and her husband, some childhood friends. I felt like a stranger at my own son's party. And then they went away on a wedding trip, came back and started to live their own lives in which there was less and less room for me. Excuse me, do you know when we'll be in Idaho Falls? I ask Eunice, breaking the long silence. She takes a break from her book. We're scheduled to arrive at 7 p.m., but the driver said we're a little behind because of the traffic in Salt Lake City. I nod and turn away from the window again. Clouds are covering the sky. It looks like it's going to rain, not the best weather for surprise visits. Will your son meet you at the bus station? Eunice asks. No, I'll take a cab, I reply. I want the surprise to be complete. Eunice nods, but I can see from her face that she doubts my idea. I'm starting to doubt it myself. What if Garrett isn't happy? What if Merritt met me coldly? What if I've come all this way for nothing? But then I remember how Garrett smiled in that picture in front of the new house, the house he never told me about. And the determination returns. I have to see how my son lives. I have to understand why he's estranged from me. And if it's because of his wife, then I'll find a way to make it right. The bus slows down and the driver announces the next stop. Eunice closes her book and stands up. I need to stretch and get something to eat, she says. Would you like to come with me? I shake my head. I don't have an appetite and I'm tired of talking. Eunice shrugs and gets off the bus. I'm alone and sink back into my thoughts. I think back to when Garrett was little. How shy and quiet he grew up. How the other boys sometimes teased him and I protected him. How he cried when his father died and I told him that now we had to stick together, that now we were a team, and now he has a new team. Him and Merritt and me. I'm just an old woman traveling across the country to impose my presence where it may not be welcome. When Eunice returns, I pretend to doze off. I don't feel like continuing the conversation. Her questions make me doubt myself, and right now I need reassurance. The rest of the ride passes in silence. Eunice reads. I look out the window and think about the upcoming meeting. Outside the window, it starts to rain, lightly at first, then harder and harder. The drops drum on the glass, and the sound is strangely soothing. When the bus finally pulls into Idaho Falls, it is dark. The rain has intensified, and the city looks like a blur of lights behind the wet glass. Here we are, Eunice says, closing her book. Are you sure no one's meeting you? Right, I answer, pulling my bag from the top shelf. I told you it was a surprise. Well, good luck to you then, she says without much enthusiasm. I hope your son will be pleased. Thank you. I nod, though I can hear the doubt in her words. We walk out to the bus station in the pouring rain. Eunice says goodbye quickly and hurries to a woman with an umbrella who waves at her. Apparently her daughter. I am left alone under the awning, clutching the handle of my tattered travel bag. Idaho Falls Station is small and uncomfortable. A few benches, a newspaper stand, a cafe that appears to be closing. I walk up to the cab stand and give the address I found on the internet. The cab driver, an elderly man with a gray mustache, nods and takes my bag. We drive through the wet streets of an unfamiliar city. The rain is pelting the roof of the car, the windshield wipers working at full capacity. The cab driver tries to make conversation, but I answer one-wordedly, and he abandons the attempt. I look at the houses floating outside the window and think, my son lives in one of them, living a life that has no place for me. But today, I'm going to change that. Today, I will remind him who his real family is. The cab stops in front of a two-story house with a small front garden. Even through the rain, you can see that the house is new and well-maintained. White walls, dark roof, large windows. In the driveway is Garrett's car, the silver Ford he bought 2 years ago. Here we are, ma'am, the cabbie says. That'll be $23. I pay, adding a modest tip, and walk out into the rain. The cabbie puts my bag on the sidewalk and drives off, leaving me alone in front of my son's house. I stand in the pouring rain, soaked to the skin, and stare at the glowing windows. A silhouette flashes through one of them, a female silhouette, clearly not Garrett. Merritt's at home, which means my sister-in-law will be the first to know my mother-in-law is coming. I take a deep breath, grab my bag, and head for the door. With each step, my resolve grows stronger. I'm Garrett's mother. I have every right to be here, to see how my son lives, to be a part of his life. I ring the doorbell and wait, feeling the raindrops dripping down my collar. I stood in the pouring rain, pressing the bell and gripping the handle of my soaked bag tighter. I'd found the address of the Idaho Falls house the day before on the internet, scrutinizing Merritt's social media page. The picture of the keys to the new house left no doubt they'd moved in without a word to me. The bell rang through the house with a melodic trill. I shuffled impatiently from foot to foot, feeling the water dripping down my collar. Finally, the door opened. Merritt stood on the doorstep, wearing housepants and a loose t-shirt. Her face changed from annoyance to shock at the sight of me. "Doris?" She blinked several times. "What are you doing here?" "Hello, Merritt." I tried to smile. "I decided to visit you in your new home." Surprise. Merritt stared at me as if I had announced the end of the world. I noticed her hand gripping the doorknob tighter. "Does Garrett know you're here?" she asked, making no attempt to invite me inside, even though I was standing in the pouring rain. "No, I wanted to surprise him," I repeated. "Can I come in? It's a little wet in here." That was the understatement of the century. My blouse was soaked through and clinging to my body, and water dripped from my hair. Merritt reluctantly took a step back, letting me into the hallway, but her face remained wary. "Garrett's not home," she said dryly. "He'll be home later." I looked around. The hallway was spacious, with a high ceiling and marble floor. To the right of the entrance was a wide staircase to the second floor, and to the left was an archway that seemed to lead to the living room. Everything looked expensive and classy, much more expensive than I'd expected. "It's a beautiful house," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral, though a mixture of envy and bewilderment swirled inside me. Where did they get the money for such a place? "Thank you," Merritt answered without a trace of hospitality. "Look, Doris, this isn't a good time to visit. We're having a housewarming party tonight, and I have a lot of preparations to make." "A housewarming party?" I felt something inside me clench. "And you didn't invite me?" Merritt stepped awkwardly from foot to foot. "We didn't think you'd want to drive across the country for a party." "For a party?" I couldn't hide the hurt in my voice. "This is your first home of your own. Of course I'd want to come." Merritt bit her lip, obviously choosing her words. At that moment, a woman's voice came from the back of the house. "Merritt? Who is it?" "Just a moment," she shouted back, and then turned to me. "Look, Doris, I realize you've come a long way, but this really isn't a good time. Maybe you could stay at the inn and come back tomorrow? When Garrett's home?" I stood there, not believing my ears. My sister-in-law was practically kicking me out the door. Me, her husband's mother. "I'm not going to any inn," I said firmly. "I traveled halfway across the country to see my son and your new home, and I'm staying here until I see Garrett." Merritt sighed heavily, and I noticed the change in her face. The mask of politeness was gone, giving way to outright annoyance. "Listen," she said quietly but firmly. "We have a big night tonight. Garrett's colleagues are coming, my friends, my neighbors. We've been planning this housewarming for weeks, and I don't have time to deal with you right now." I could feel the color pouring down my face. "To take care of me? I don't need anyone to handle me. I just want to see my son." "Garrett won't be here until tonight," Merritt cut him off. "He's at work, then he's going to get cake and champagne. I've got a lot to do." She nodded toward the living room where the voices were coming from. My sister's there helping me with the decorations, and the food will be here soon. I really don't have time for you. Suddenly, a young woman, a copy of Merritt, but with longer hair, came out of the living room. Obviously, her sister. What's going on? She asked, shifting her gaze from Merritt to me. Lyra, this is Doris, my mother-in-law. Merritt introduced me as if she were saying, "It's a plague rat." She decided to stop by unannounced, right now. Lyra gave me an unpleasant look, lingering on my wet clothes and disheveled hair. "Oh, hi," she said without enthusiasm. "Not the best time to visit, is it? We're a little busy here." I felt like I'd been kicked in the butt. Two young women stood in front of me, showing me that I wasn't welcome. "I'm Garrett's mother," I said, standing up to my small stature. "And I have every right to be here." Merritt glanced at her sister, and something like anger flashed in her eyes. "Actually, no," she said coldly. "This is my and Garrett's house, and we decide who can come over and when, especially unannounced." I opened my mouth to object, but Merritt continued. "Get out of here, old lady." Her eyes narrowed. "You are not welcome. We didn't call you, do you understand? Neither Garrett nor I want you here." Her words hit me like a slap. I recoiled, staring at her in disbelief. "You can't talk to me like that," I whispered. "I'm Garrett's mother." "And I'm his wife." Merritt cut me off. "And he chose me over you. Get over it." At that moment, the doorbell rang. Merritt opened the door without taking her eyes off me. Two men in catering uniforms stood on the doorstep. "Delivery for Mrs. Hammond," one of them said. "Yes, come in." Merritt pointed toward the kitchen. "My sister will help you." The men came in, carrying large containers of food. One of them looked at me curiously, but said nothing. When the door closed behind them, Merritt turned to me with a determined look. "That's it, Doris. That's enough. I'm calling a cab, and you're getting out of here." Now, something in her tone made me realize that further resistance was futile. I could make a scene. I could yell and demand, but in the end, it would only hurt my relationship with Garrett, if there was anything left of it at all. "Okay," I said, trying to keep my dignity. "I'll leave, but tell Garrett I'm here to see him." Merritt nodded, pulling out her cell phone. "I will. Now wait on the porch, please. The cab will be here in 5 minutes." On the porch? In the rain? I couldn't believe my ears. Merritt sighed. "There's an awning out there, and I need to get back to my preparations." I silently took my bag and went out onto the porch. The rain had stopped a little, but it was still drizzling. I stood under the awning, feeling like a stray dog that had been turned out the door. Through the window, I could see Merritt back in the living room, where her sister was arranging some candles and vases of flowers. They were talking animatedly about something, and I had no doubt that I was the topic of conversation. The cab came quickly. The driver indifferently threw my bag into the trunk and asked, "Where are we going?" "To the nearest hotel," I said, having no idea what hotels there were in Idaho Falls. "Would the Holiday Inn be okay? It's about 15 minutes from here." I nodded and got in the car, casting one last glance at my son's house, a house I had no place in. The Holiday Inn turned out to be a decent hotel with faceless rooms. I rented a room for 2 nights, not knowing how long I would end up staying in this city. Once in the room, I took a hot shower, washing away the fatigue of the long drive and the humiliation of meeting Merritt. Then I changed into dry clothes and sat on the bed, staring out the window at the rainy evening. What now? Call Garrett? What am I going to say? "Hey, son, I came uninvited and your wife kicked me out the door." That would only make things worse. I put the phone away and went to the window. The rain was still falling, pouring down the streets of Idaho Falls. Somewhere out there, in a beautiful new house, my son and his wife were getting ready for a party I wasn't invited to. but I wasn't going to give up so easily. I didn't drive across the country to sit in a faceless hotel room feeling sorry for myself. I had come to see my son, and I would see him, with or without Merritt's consent. A plan began to form in my head. If the party starts at 8, then the guests will arrive around 8:30. In the hustle and bustle, no one would notice one more person, especially if I walked in looking confident. I opened my suitcase and started going through my things. The dark blue dress I'd taken just in case looked dressy enough for such an event. A little makeup, a little hairstyling, and no one would recognize the elegant lady as the drenched woman Merritt had shoved out the door. I knew what I was doing was wrong. I knew I was only making things worse. But something inside me, some mixture of resentment, anger, and a desperate desire to be a part of my son's life, was pushing me forward. By 7 p.m., I was completely ready. The blue dress didn't fit as well as it had before. I'd put on a little weight over the past year, but overall, I looked pretty decent. My hair was styled, my makeup hid the signs of fatigue, and I had a determined smile on my lips. I hailed a cab and called the address of Garrett's house. My heart was pounding with excitement and fear, but I wouldn't let myself change my mind. I had to see my son. I had to understand what was going on in his life. The cab stopped a block away from the house. I'd asked the driver to do so, not wanting Merritt to accidentally see me out the window. After paying the fare, I walked leisurely down the street, careful not to step in the puddles in my only decent shoes. As I got closer, I saw that several cars were already parked in the driveway and along the curb. The guests were starting to move in. From the open windows of the house came music and the sound of voices. I stopped in the shade of a tree, watching. The front door opened and closed, letting in the smartly dressed people. Merritt greeted them with a smile, accepting flowers and bottles of wine. Standing beside her was a tall man in a light-colored shirt, Garrett, my son. Even from a distance, I could see how he'd changed. He had more confidence, a wider smile. He looked happy, without me. The thought pricked my heart, but I pushed it away. Of course he's happy. He has a new house, a good job, a beautiful wife. But shouldn't his mother share in that joy? I noticed Merritt scrutinizing each person who entered. She was clearly alert. Perhaps she'd warned Garrett of my arrival, and now they were both expecting me to show up at the party. There had to be another way in. I walked the perimeter of the house, keeping in the shade of the trees. The backyard was lit with garlands, and there were tables with drinks and appetizers. Several guests had already moved there with glasses in hand. The glass sliding door, probably leading from the kitchen to the courtyard, was ajar. People in white uniforms, catering, were scurrying back and forth, bringing out trays of food. This was my chance. I waited until there was no one left in the courtyard and headed confidently toward the sliding door. Slipping inside, I found myself in the spacious kitchen, which was bustling with activity. No one paid me any attention, just another smartly dressed lady among dozens of others. I walked quickly through the kitchen into the hallway, and from there into the living room. The large room was filled with people. Some were standing in groups, talking and laughing. Others were looking around the house, and still others were crowded around the drinks table. I took a glass of wine from the tray of a passing waiter and took a sip for courage. Now I had to find Garrett, but without Merritt noticing me first. Some middle-aged man nodded at me with a smile. "Good evening," he said. "You must be one of Garrett's co-workers? I'm Ned Pickering, a neighbor." "Doris Hammond," I replied, extending my hand. "Yeah, a relative." It wasn't a lie. Technically, I am indeed related to the owners of the house. "Oh, how interesting," Ned perked up. "On Garrett's side or Merritt's?" "Garrett's side," I smiled. "How long have you known the young people?" "A couple months since they bought the house. Great neighbors, quiet, polite." I nodded, pretending to be interested, but my eyes searched for Garrett. Finally, I spotted him at the opposite end of the room. He was talking to an older man who looked very important in his expensive suit. Along the way, I heard a snippet of conversation between two women. "They say they took out a huge mortgage," said one, a full blonde woman in a bright red dress. "Even with Garrett's salary, it's crazy." "Merritt said they had savings," objected the other, a skinny brunette. "Something about an inheritance from an aunt." "Merritt? What aunt?" "Her parents live in a trailer park in Idaho Springs, so what inheritance?" This conversation got me interested. I had always suspected Merritt didn't come from a wealthy family, although she never said so explicitly. But then, where would the money for a house like this come from? I continued across the room, but Garrett was already out of sight. As I made my way between the guests, I noticed a door that seemed to lead to another wing of the house. When I opened it, I saw a small hallway with several doors. One of them was ajar, and Garrett's voice came from there. I stepped back carefully, not wanting to be caught eavesdropping. I decided to wait in the living room until he was free. But as I turned, I almost ran into Merritt. She was standing at the end of the hallway, holding a tray of canapes, staring at me wide-eyed in amazement. "Doris?" Her voice was quiet, but there was fury in it. "What are you doing here?" I straightened, trying to look confident. "I'm here for the housewarming party," I said calmly. "I wanted to congratulate my son on buying the house." "I told you not to come," Merritt hissed, looking around. "How did you even get in?" "Through the back door," I answered honestly. "Look, Merritt, I'm not going to make a scene. I just want to see Garrett and congratulate you on your new home." Merritt pressed her lips into a thin line. "You've already seen the house, and you'll see Garrett as soon as the party's over. Now I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "No," I said firmly. "I'm not leaving until I talk to my son." Merritt hesitated, clearly considering her options. Finally, she sighed. "Okay, you can stay for the rest of the party, but stay away from Garrett while he talks to his boss." With those words, she turned and walked back into the living room, leaving me alone in the hallway. I wasn't going to stay away from my own son, but I decided to let him finish his business conversation. Instead, I decided to look around the house. Since I was here, why not see how Garrett and Merritt lived? I walked further down the hallway, peering through the open doors. The third door led to a study. I cautiously peeked inside. No one was there. The room was decorated in an austere style: a large wooden desk, a leather armchair, a computer, shelves with folders and books. Garrett's diplomas and some certificates hung on the walls. I entered, quietly closing the door behind me. This was clearly Garrett's office. I recognized the desk lamp, a gift from me for his last birthday, and the framed picture of Garrett in his graduation robe, with me next to him, so proud and happy. At least he hadn't removed all reminders of me. I walked over to the desk, looking at the papers lying on it. Most were work-related: blueprints, calculations, reports. But then my gaze fell on an ajar desk drawer. Inside was a stack of envelopes, bills, and notices from the bank. I knew I shouldn't do this, but curiosity got the better of me. I carefully pulled out one of the envelopes and opened it. It was a late payment notice on a credit card. It was in the name of Merritt Hammond. The amount owed was $32,000. I gasped. $32,000! That was more than I made in a year at the department store. With trembling hands, I pulled out another envelope. A notice from another bank about a late payment on a loan. $27,000 more. The third envelope contained a letter from a collection agency demanding repayment of $45,000. I couldn't believe my eyes. Merritt owed over $100,000 to banks and credit organizations. And judging by the dates on the notices, some of these debts had been pending for over a year. Did Garrett know this? Judging by the fact that the letters were hidden in his desk drawer rather than lying openly, not likely, Merritt must have kept her debts from him. I continued my search and soon found another folder. It contained Merritt's bank statements. Looking through them, I noticed regular large cash withdrawals and transfers to accounts labeled only by numbers. Many of the transactions were made at the Golden Eagle Casino in a neighboring town. Casino, gambling, it was all starting to come together. At that moment, the office door opened, and Garrett appeared on the doorstep. He froze when he saw me at his desk with papers in my hands. "Mom?" He sounded incredulous. "What are you doing here?" I stood up, still holding the papers. "Garrett, honey," I started, but he interrupted me. "How did you get here? Why are you going through my things?" I took a step toward him. "I came to wish you a happy housewarming. And I found this by accident. Garrett, we need to talk. Alone." He frowned when he saw the papers in my hands. "What are these?" he asked, holding out his hand. I handed him the papers. "Merritt's debts," I said quietly. "Credit cards, loans, debt collectors. Garrett, she owed over $100,000. My son's face changed. Disbelief, shock, then anger flashed in his eyes as he looked through the papers. "That's impossible," he muttered. "Merritt would have told me. We discuss everything openly." "Obviously not everything," I countered. "Look at the dates. Some of the debts are over a year old. And these transactions at the casino." Garrett turned pale as he read the bank statements. "Casino. Merritt doesn't gamble. She always said it was a waste of money." The office door opened again, and Merritt appeared on the doorstep. She started to say something, but stopped talking when she saw the look on Garrett's face and the papers in his hands. "What's going on?" she asked, shifting her gaze from me to her husband. Garrett picked up the papers. "Is it true, Merritt? Do you owe the banks over $100,000? Do you go to casinos?" Merritt turned pale. Her gaze swept over me, full of rage and fear. "You," she exhaled. "You went through our things? How dare you?" "Don't change the subject," Garrett interjected, his voice hard. "Is it true?" Merritt bit her lip, clearly trying to find a way out of the situation. "Garrett, it's not what you think," she began. "These debts, they're not mine. I was helping my sister. Lara was in trouble, and I took out loans in my name to help her." I shook my head. "Bank statements show regular visits to the casino, and all transactions were made from your card, Merritt." "You're lying," she exclaimed, looking at me with hatred. "Garrett, don't listen to her. She's just trying to make us fight." Garrett turned to his wife, his face petrified. "No more lies," he said quietly but firmly. "I want the truth." Now Merritt looked around. Some of the guests had already begun to pay attention to their conversation. "Not here," she whispered. "Garrett, please, not in front of everyone." "Have you been losing our money at the casino?" he asked, ignoring her plea. "Did you take out loans behind my back? Answer me." His voice echoed through the room, and the conversations died down. All eyes turned to them. Merritt looked cornered. Her eyes filled with tears. "I can explain everything," she said in a shaky voice. "I'm listening." Garrett crossed his arms over his chest. Merritt gave me a hateful look, then turned to her husband. "It started out as fun," she said quietly. "Small bets, nothing serious. But then I lost more than I could afford, and I tried to win it back." "And you were going to keep that from me?" Garrett asked. "How long, Merritt?" "I could have handled it," she sobbed. "I've already agreed to restructure some of my debts, and I'm not gambling anymore, I swear." "How much do you owe?" Garrett insisted. Merritt was silent, tears streaming down her cheeks. 105,000, she finally said. Maybe a little more, with interest. A whisper spread through the room. The guests looked at each other, obviously uncomfortable at having witnessed such a personal scene. Merritt burst into tears, covering her face with her hands. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she sobbed. "I was going to tell you everything when I found a way out." "3 years, Merritt," Garrett said quietly. "3 years of marriage, and you lied to me the whole time." I stood beside him, feeling a mixture of triumph and pity. I'd exposed my daughter-in-law's lies, but seeing my son's pain was unbearable. "Garrett," I began, putting my hand on his shoulder. He pulled away. "Not now, Mom." His voice sounded tired. "You've done enough already." After Merritt's public exposure, the party ended quickly. The guests hurried away, mumbling awkward apologies and avoiding eye contact with their hosts. I stood in the corner of the living room feeling both victorious and defeated. Yes, I had exposed my daughter-in-law's lies, but the cost was the pain in my son's eyes. An older man, Garrett's boss, Mr. Woodworth, approached him before he left and said something quietly, patting him on the shoulder. Garrett nodded grimly. His face was as if carved from stone. Not a muscle wavered, only the jowls of his cheekbones. Merritt sat on the couch with her face in her palms. Her sister Lara stood beside her, stroking her back and glaring at me accusingly, as if it were my fault that her sister was a pathological liar and gambler. When the last guest left, there was a heavy silence in the house, broken only by Merritt's muffled sobs. The catering staff was quietly gathering dishes in the kitchen, trying to finish as quickly as possible and get out of this house, where the air seemed electrified with tension. I hesitantly approached Garrett, who was standing at the window, staring out at the darkness behind the glass. "Son," I began softly, "I'm sorry about what happened, but you needed to know the truth." Garrett turned slowly toward me, and the look on his face made me take a step back. I'd never seen such cold fury in his eyes. "The truth?" he said quietly, but there was more menace in the silence than in the shouting. "Were you interested in the truth, Mother, or the possibility of ruining my marriage?" I flinched as if I'd been slapped. "What are you talking about? I was acting in your best interest. That woman has been cheating on you for years, secretly funneling your money into casinos, running up debts. And you think the best way to let me know about it was to make a public scandal at a party where my boss was present?" Garrett shook his head. "Do you realize you could have cost me my career?" I was confused. I hadn't really thought about that. "Yeah, I didn't mean to." "Yes, you did," he interrupted me. "You came uninvited. You snuck into a party you were asked to leave. You went through my personal papers, and then you made a scene in front of all my coworkers and neighbors." He ran his hand through his hair. "Jesus, Mom, what were you trying to do?" "I wanted to protect you," I exclaimed. "She's a liar, Garrett. She manipulated you, hid her debts, maybe even used your money to pay them off." "That's my and Merritt's problem," Garrett said firmly. "Not yours. We'll deal with it ourselves." "But that's enough." He raised his voice and I flinched. Garrett had never yelled at me before. "Yes, Merritt lied to me. She's got some serious problems we're going to have to deal with. But you?" He pointed his finger at me. "You did everything you could to make things worse. Not out of concern for me, but to prove you were right about her all along." His words hurt because there was some truth to them. I had never really approved of his choice. I thought Merritt wasn't right for him, that she was trying to distance him from me. And part of me was actually relieved when my suspicions were confirmed. "Garrett, listen." I took a step toward him, but he backed away. "I'm your mother. I'll always take care of you, always try to protect you." "Protect me from what? From happiness? From independence?" He grinned bitterly. Do you know why we didn't tell you about the house? Because we knew you would find a way to mar our joy. With your doubts, your wise counsel, your disapproval. He shook his head. And you didn't disappoint. I stood stunned by his words. Is that really what my son thinks of me? Am I really that terrible of a mother? You're not being fair, I said quietly. I always wanted the best for you. No, Mom, Garrett said tiredly. You wanted me to be the boy I was after my father died, dependent on you, obedient, needing your approval. But I've grown up. I have my own life, my own decisions, and my own mistakes that I have to fix on my own. That's when Lara came up to us. Garrett, she said gently, I think I'd better leave. Merritt needs to rest. He nodded. Yes, of course. Thank you for being with her. Lara threw me a cold glance and headed for the exit. A moment later, the front door slammed. It was just the three of us again, Garrett, me, and Merritt, who was still sitting on the couch, unconcerned. Her face was puffy from crying, her mascara smeared, giving the impression of dark circles under her eyes. Garrett walked over to her and sat down next to her. He didn't hug her, didn't take her hand, just sat next to her. We need to talk, he said quietly. About everything. No secrets. Merritt nodded without looking up. I know, she whispered. I'll tell you everything. Everything. Garrett turned to me. Mom, you'd better go. I froze, unable to believe my ears. Leave? But where? It's almost midnight. I'm from out of state. You're staying at the Holiday Inn, he reminded me. Merritt told me she called you a cab there this afternoon. But, Garrett, I could feel the panic rising inside me. We have to discuss this together. I can help. No, he cut me off. This is between me and Merritt. Just ours. He stood up. I'll call you a cab. But, son, please, Mom, he said, a note of weariness in his voice. Don't complicate things any further. I stared at him, feeling my world crumble. My son, my boy, the one I'd raised alone after my husband died, was choosing this liar over me. Even now, when her deception was exposed, he was still taking her side. Okay, I said finally, trying to keep my dignity. I'll go, but we have to talk tomorrow. Calmly, like adults. Garrett nodded, but without much enthusiasm. I'll call you tomorrow, he said, already dialing the cab number on his phone. I stood in the hallway, watching him make arrangements for a car. Merritt never came out to say goodbye, but I could hear her muffled sobs from the living room. Part of me wanted to celebrate. She'd gotten what she deserved for her lies. But the other part felt strangely empty. I'd expected Merritt's revelation to bring me closer to my son, to bring him back to me. Instead, it seemed only to widen the gap between us. The cab came quickly. Garrett walked me to the door. Good night, Mom, he said formally, like he was saying good night to someone he didn't know. Good night, son, I said, trying to catch his eye. I love you, no matter what happens. He nodded, but didn't say anything in response. Just closed the door as soon as I stepped out onto the porch. I got into the cab with a heavy heart. All the way back to the hotel, I stared out the window, but I couldn't see the night city beyond the glass. Garrett's face was in front of me, cold, alienating. When I got back to my room at the Holiday Inn, I mechanically undressed, showered, and went to bed. But sleep wouldn't come. I replayed the evening's events in my head, trying to figure out where I'd gone wrong. Maybe I really shouldn't have gone public. Maybe I should have talked to Garrett alone first, shown him the documents without witnesses. But what if he hadn't believed me? What if Merritt had had time to warn him, to distort the facts, to make me look like a liar? No, I did the right thing. Garrett had to know the truth. And now that the initial shock has passed, He will realize that I acted out of love for him. He'd realize that his mother would always be on his side, unlike the woman who had deceived him for years. With that thought, I finally fell into a restless sleep. The morning greeted me with a headache and a feeling of disorientation. I didn't realize where I was for a few seconds until the memories of last night came flooding back. I glanced at the clock 9 in the morning. Garrett should have been awake by now, maybe even gone to work, though after that scandal, I doubted he'd go to the office. I picked up my phone, checking for any missed calls or messages. Nothing. Garrett hadn't tried to contact me. Deciding to give him some time, I ordered breakfast for the room and turned on the TV to take my mind off the heavy thoughts. The local news, the weather forecast, some cooking show. It all passed me by without lingering in my mind. By 11 o'clock, I couldn't stand it any longer and dialed my son's number. It was ringing, but no one answered. Finally, the voicemail went to voicemail, and I heard a familiar voice. "You've reached Garrett Hammond. Leave a message after the beep." "Garrett, it's Mom," I said after the beep. "Please call me back when you can. I'm worried about you. I'm sorry if I hurt you. I meant well. Please call me." As I hung up the phone, I felt even more alone. My son didn't want to talk to me. Maybe he didn't even want to see me, all because of this woman who had deceived him for years. I spent the next few hours in my room, checking my phone periodically. Nothing. I tried to read the book I'd brought with me on the road, but I couldn't concentrate. My thoughts kept coming back to Garrett, to his cold stare, to his words. "You wanted me to stay the boy I was after my father died." It wasn't fair. I'd always supported his independence. Happy when he was successful in college, proud when he found a good job. Yes, I missed him when he left for another state. Yes, I was lonely in an empty apartment. But did that make me a bad mom? Isn't it natural for a parent to miss their child? At 3 in the afternoon, I decided to walk around town to clear my head. Idaho Falls turned out to be a pleasant place. Clean streets, friendly people, beautiful views of the Snake River. In another situation, I would have enjoyed the walk, but right now, everything around me seemed faded and bleak. I walked into a small cafe on the main street, ordered a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the passers-by. A couple with a small child, an elderly man with a dog, a group of teenagers on skateboards, the usual life of an ordinary city. All these people were going about their business, dealing with their own problems, unaware of the drama unfolding in my life. Back at the hotel, I checked my phone again. Nothing. I dialed Garrett's number again, but now the phone was off or out of range. By late afternoon, my worry had turned into real anxiety. What if Garrett did something rash? What if he and Merritt had a fight and he went off somewhere? Or worse, what if he decided to give her another chance, to forgive her cheating? I didn't know which of those things scared me more. At 7 p.m., just as I was about to call a third time, my phone finally showed signs of life, but it wasn't what I was hoping for. Instead of a call came a text message. "Mom, Merritt and I need time to sort things out. Please don't call or come over. I'll get back to you when I'm ready to talk. Garrett." I reread the message several times, trying to catch some emotion in it, some hint of what was going on between him and Merritt. But the text was dry and formal, as if written by a stranger. Merritt and I? Not me, but we. So they're still together. So he hadn't kicked her out, despite her lies, her debts, her betrayal. I felt a wave of bitterness rising inside. After everything that had happened, he still chose her. Even now that the truth has come out, he's still on her side. I started to type a reply, but stopped. What could I say? That I understood his choice? That would be a lie. That I respect his decision? That wouldn't be true either. That I love him no matter what? That was the only truth, but now those words seemed empty. I ended up writing simply, "Okay, I'll wait for your call." As I sent the message, I felt strangely empty. It was like something important was gone from my life, leaving behind only emptiness. I spent the rest of the evening aimlessly changing channels on the TV, trying not to think about what was going on at Garrett and Merritt's house. My imagination painted pictures of their reconciliation, of her tears and promises to make things right, of his forgiveness. The thoughts made me sick to my stomach. Around 10 p.m., another text came in. I grabbed my phone, hoping Garrett had changed his mind and wanted to talk. But it wasn't. "I know you're here for a reason. You never approved of Merritt, never gave her a chance. You showed up unannounced on purpose to take us by surprise. You went through our things looking for dirt. You wanted to destroy my family, and you didn't care what it would do to me. Maybe you should go back to Pittsburgh. I'll call you when I'm ready to communicate." I reread those cruel words, unable to believe my son had written them. My Garrett, my boy who had always been so kind, so understanding. What had she done to him? How had she managed to turn him against his own mother even after her deception was exposed? Tears streamed down my cheeks as I tried to find an answer. But what could I say? How could I explain that I had come out of love and not out of a desire to destroy? That I just wanted to be a part of his life, to see his new home, to share in his joy? In the end, I didn't answer anything. I just put the phone on the nightstand and lay there, staring at the ceiling through a veil of tears. I came to Idaho Falls to get my son back, but instead, I think I'd lost him for good. Garrett's words rang in my head. "You wanted to destroy my family." No, I wanted to protect him from the woman who was deceiving him, manipulating him, secretly losing their money at the casino. Did that make me a bad mother? Was it wrong? But somewhere deep inside, a worm of doubt began to gnaw at me. Maybe Garrett was right. Maybe I really never gave Merritt a chance. Maybe I was subconsciously looking for ways to prove she wasn't right for him. No, that's not true. I just wanted what was best for him. I wanted him to be happy. I wanted to protect him from pain. But wasn't I the one causing him that pain now? With these agonizing thoughts, I spent a sleepless night. The morning brought no relief or clarity. Garrett didn't write or call again. I felt thrown out of his life, unwanted, superfluous. Maybe he was right. Maybe I really should go back to Pittsburgh, wait for his anger to subside, for him to realize that I was acting out of love, not malice. I started packing, determined to grab a ticket for the nearest bus. But my heart clenched at the thought of leaving without making peace with my son, without making sure he was okay. Maybe I should have tried again. Go to his house, talk to him calmly, explain my motives. But his message was unequivocal. Don't call and don't come. And the last thing I wanted to do was push him further away with my insistence. I sat down on the bed, feeling completely lost. What should I do? Leave like he asked, or stay and fight for our relationship? I woke up with a determination I hadn't felt since yesterday. After a sleepless night spent thinking about Garrett's words, I realized I couldn't leave without trying to make things right. Yes, I had made a mistake in publicly exposing Merritt, but my intentions were sincere. I wanted to protect my son from deception. After I showered and dressed in the most decent outfit I had with me, a navy blue dress and cardigan, I went down to the hotel lobby and asked the receptionist to call me a cab. "Where are you going, ma'am?" the driver asked when I got in the car. I told him the address of Garrett and Merritt's house, trying to sound confident, but inside I was trembling with fear. What if Garrett refused to listen to me? What if he just shut the door in my face like Merritt had done the first day? The cab drove through the morning streets of Idaho Falls. The day promised to be sunny but cool. Typical fall weather. I looked out the window at the neat houses with manicured lawns, at the people hurrying to work, at the school children with backpacks, the ordinary life of an ordinary town. I wondered if any of these people knew about the drama that had played out yesterday at my son's house. When the cab stopped in front of a familiar two-story house, I felt my heart start to beat faster. I paid the driver and got out, trying not to look at the neighboring houses in case any of last night's guests saw me and started whispering. When I got to the door, I took a deep breath and pressed the bell. I waited. Nothing. I pressed it again, longer. Silence. No one seemed to be in the house. I walked around the house, looking in the windows. The living room was still showing signs of last night's party: uncorked glasses, crumpled napkins. But there was no sign of Garrett or Merritt. Maybe they'd gone to work. But after a scandal like this, that seemed unlikely. Besides, Garrett's car wasn't in the driveway. I went back to the front door and rang the bell again, without much hope. I heard a voice behind me. "They're gone." I turned around. There was a middle-aged woman standing in the neighboring lot, watering the flowers on her front porch. "Excuse me?" I asked, moving closer. "Garrett and Merritt," the woman explained. "They left early this morning. I saw them loading their suitcases into the car. I felt something inside me snap. They left? Where? And why didn't you tell me? You don't know where they were going?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. The woman shrugged. "They didn't, but Garrett had mentioned that they needed time to figure things out." I nodded, not knowing what to say back. Obviously, this woman had been at last night's party and knew about the scandal. Maybe she even knew who I was. "You're Garrett's mother, aren't you?" she asked, confirming my suspicions. "I'm Fiona Pickering, Ned's wife. We're neighbors." "Yes, I'm Doris Hammond." I extended my hand, which she shook after a moment's hesitation. "Nice to meet you." "Likewise," Fiona said, though it was clear from her tone that she wasn't being sincere. Uh, about last night. I know it looked awful," I said hurriedly, "and I'm really sorry for what happened. I just wanted to protect my son." Fiona looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite make out, a mixture of pity and disapproval. "You know, Mrs. Hammond," she said at last, "sometimes the best defense is to give your children the right to make their own mistakes." Her words cut me, reminding me of what Garrett had said. Did everyone really think I was an annoying, controlling mother who couldn't let go of her grown son? "I just wanted him to know the truth," I said quietly. "Merritt was cheating on him. She has serious debts, gambling problems." "I know," Fiona nodded. "Everyone heard yesterday. And yes, it's serious. But," she paused as if searching for words, "but it's their problems they have to deal with together, as a couple." "Together?" I couldn't hide the bitterness in my voice. "After such a betrayal?" Fiona sighed. "Look, I don't know all the details, and it's none of my business, but I saw them leaving this morning, together, holding hands, and if Garrett decided to give his marriage another chance, isn't that his choice?" I was silent, trying to make sense of what she was saying. Garrett and Merritt left together. Not apart, despite her lies, her debts, her addiction. My son chose to stay with his wife, to work on their problems together. He never said a word to me about leaving. "Thank you for the information," I finally said. "Do you know when they plan to return?" "They didn't," Fiona shook her head. "But Garrett had mentioned something about a hotel on the lake. It sounded like they decided to take a little vacation so they could talk things over in peace. A hotel on the lake. Perhaps Lake Coeur d'Alene or Lake Pend Oreille are popular vacation spots in the area. I could try to find them, talk to Garrett alone." But something in the expression on Fiona's face made me stop. She was looking at me with obvious disapproval, as if reading my mind. "Look, Mrs. Hammond," she said softly but firmly, "I understand that you're worried about your son, but maybe he needs space right now. Time to deal with his wife without outside interference? Her words were like a slap, though spoken with apparent concern. Outside interference. That's what I've become in my son's life, an unwelcome intrusion. Yes, you're probably right, I said, trying to maintain my dignity. Please tell them I stopped by if you see them before I do. Sure, Fiona nodded, clearly relieved that I wasn't going to make a scene or ask her for more information. I turned around and walked down the street not knowing where I was going. I just needed to move, to do something, not to think about the fact that my son had left without saying a word to me, that he chose to be with his lying wife over his mother, who tried to protect him. I wandered the streets of Idaho Falls with no definite purpose until I found myself in a small park on the banks of the Snake River. There I sat on a bench and stared at the water, trying to collect my thoughts. Garrett had made his choice. He'd chosen Merritt, despite her lies and deceit, chose to work on their relationship, not push her away. And in that choice, there was no room for me. Maybe he's right. Maybe I really was interfering too much in his life, trying to control, to impose my decisions, my views. I remembered how I disapproved of his move to Idaho, how I criticized his new car purchase, how I always found something wrong with his decisions, his choices, his life. Maybe it was me who pushed him away, not Merritt. The thought was too painful to dwell on. I pulled out my phone and checked my messages, hoping Garrett had texted me after all, explained his departure. But the screen was blank. No new messages. I dialed his number, knowing it was useless. As expected, the phone was turned off or out of range. What should I do now? Stay in Idaho Falls and wait for him to return? Try to find that hotel on the lake, or just go back to Pittsburgh and give him that space Fiona was talking about. The last option seemed the most sensible, though the thought of returning to an empty apartment made me feel dreary. But it didn't make sense to stay here, in a strange city, with no hope of seeing my son soon. I got up from the bench and headed for the bus station. On the way, I stopped at a cafe for a snack and to check the bus schedule on my phone. The closest connecting flight to Pittsburgh was tonight. If I hurried, I could pack up my hotel and get to the train station on time. After paying for lunch, I hailed a cab to the Holiday Inn. In the room, I quickly packed my things, paid for my stay, and got into a cab again, this time to the bus station. As I bought the ticket, I felt a strange emptiness inside. It was as if something important had ended. Some stage of my life had come to an end. I had come to Idaho Falls hoping to reconnect with my son, to bring him back into my life. And I left with the realization that I might have lost him forever. It was still about an hour before the bus left, and I sat in the waiting room, staring out the window at the fading dusk. All around me, people were coming and going. Some were hurrying to catch their flight. Some were meeting relatives or friends who had arrived. The usual life of an ordinary bus station. And I felt thrown out of the flow of life, frozen in the moment of realizing my loneliness. The phone in my bag vibrated. I flinched and hurriedly reached for it, hoping it was Garrett. But it was a message from a neighbor in Pittsburgh, Betty Caulfield, asking when I would be back to give me the mail she'd been picking up while I was away. I replied that I'd be home in 2 days and put the phone away again. Didn't even bother to write, I thought bitterly. Didn't even bother to let me know he was leaving. At that moment, an elderly woman with a small suitcase approached me. "Excuse me, is this seat free?" she asked, pointing to the seat next to me. "Yes, of course," I replied, moving my bag. The woman sat down, nodding gratefully. She looked to be about 70, with neatly styled gray hair and kind eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses. "Do you know if the flight to Boise has boarded yet?" she asked. "No, not yet," I said, "but it's scheduled to leave in 45 minutes. "Thank you," the woman smiled. "I'm Margaret Wilkins, by the way." "Doris Hammond," I said back. "Are you going to Boise, too?" Margaret asked. No, Pittsburgh. It's a connecting flight. Oh, that's a long way, she said sympathetically. Were you here on vacation? I hesitated, not knowing what to say. I didn't want to tell a strange woman the whole story of my unfortunate visit to my son. I was visiting relatives, I said evasively. Margaret nodded understandingly. So did I. I was at my daughter's. She sighed. Though, to be honest, it hadn't been the most pleasant visit. Something in her tone made me look at her more closely. I saw a familiar sadness in her eyes, which my gaze was probably reflecting now. Me too, I admitted suddenly to myself. I came to see my son, and in the end, well, it didn't work out the way I'd planned. Margaret nodded understandingly. Children grow up and live their own lives, and sometimes it's hard for us to accept that, she said quietly. My Emily, she's a wonderful girl, successful, smart. But every time I visit, we have conflicts. I advise something. She takes offense. I give my opinion. She thinks I'm meddling. She shook her head. This time we fought over her new boyfriend. He didn't seem serious to me, and I had the indiscretion to say so. I listened to her, feeling a strange kinship with this strange woman. Her story was so similar to mine, a mother who wants the best for her child, but ends up only pushing him away with her advice and interference. And my son is married to a woman who happens to have a serious gambling problem, I said, surprised at my candor. She ran up debts, kept it from him. I found out by accident and I told him, publicly, at a party where all their friends and co-workers were there. I expected judgment, but Margaret only shook her head sympathetically. And how did he react? Angry. At her for lying, but even more at me for making a scene and ruining their party. I sighed. And then this morning they left together without a word to me. Apparently, he's decided to give her another chance. And you don't approve of that decision. It wasn't a question, but a statement. I shrugged. I just don't understand how anyone can forgive such deceit, such betrayal. Margaret stared thoughtfully into the distance. You know, Doris, when my husband was alive, we went through a lot. There were infidelities, there were financial problems, there were fights so bad the neighbors called the police. She smiled weakly. But we stayed together because we loved each other no matter what, and because we understood that all people make mistakes. All people fall sometimes. The important thing is to find the strength to get up and move on, together. Her words made me think. I had never looked at the situation from that angle. To me, Merritt's lies were unforgivable, her addiction incurable. But perhaps Garrett saw something I didn't. Maybe their love was stronger than I thought. But what about trust? I asked. How could he trust her again after something like this? Trust can be rebuilt, Margaret said softly. It takes time, it takes work, it takes honesty, but it can be done. And it's their way, their decision, not yours. The last word sounded especially clear. Not yours. I'd heard it over and over again in the last few days. From Merritt, from Garrett, from Fiona, now from Margaret. Their lives, their decisions, their choices, not mine. I just wanted to protect him, I said quietly. I always wanted what was best for him. Of course, Margaret nodded. All mothers want that. But our children have to decide for themselves what's best for them, even if their choices seem wrong to us, even if they make mistakes. It's their lives, their mistakes, their lessons. We were silent. Her words touched me deeply, making me look at the situation from a different perspective. Maybe my son really should have gone through this himself, to decide whether to forgive Merritt or not, to choose his own path without my interference. And your daughter? I asked after a pause. Was she angry with you for your opinion of her boyfriend, too? Margaret smiled sadly. Yes, we had a big fight. She said I'm always like that, always criticizing her choices, always knowing better. And you know what? She's right. Margaret sighed. I really did always think I knew what was best for her. It's only now, at my age, that I'm beginning to realize that I don't. That Emily is a grown woman with her own views, her own values, her own way, and I need to respect that, even if I don't always agree with her decisions. So what now? I asked. You're just leaving? Yes, she nodded, gave her the space she asked for. But we did talk before we left. I apologized for my interference, said I'd try to be a better person, to respect her choices. Margaret smiled. And you know what she said? That she loves me and misses me when I'm gone. That she wants me to be a part of her life, but not try to control that life. I felt my eyes fill with tears. How I wish I could hear those words from Garrett, that he loved me, that he wanted me to be a part of his life, but instead, he just left without a word. Have you tried talking to your son? Margaret asked, as if she could read my mind. Explain that you acted in good faith? Apologize for making a scene? I tried, I sighed. But he wouldn't answer his cell phone, and now he's gone without saying where he's going. Give him time, Margaret advised. Right now he's angry, he's hurting. But when his emotions subside, he'll remember that you're his mother, that you love him, and maybe he'll realize that you really meant well, just not in the best way. Her words sounded reasonable, but not comforting. What if Garrett didn't call? What if he decides he's better off without me in his life? In the meantime, Margaret continued, live your life. Find something that brings you joy besides taking care of your son. A hobby, a job, friends, traveling, anything. Show him that you respect his choice to live his life by starting a life of your own. Live his own life. The thought was both frightening and liberating. Since Garrett had left home, I'd lived mostly his life, his successes, his problems, his decisions. Even my trip to Idaho Falls was completely centered on him. But what about myself? What about my interests, my desires, my plans? You're right, I said after a long pause. I need to learn to live for myself, not just for my son. Margaret smiled. It's not easy, especially when you've put your children first all your life. But it's possible. And, it even helps your relationship with your kids. When they see you happy, minding your own business, not trying to control their lives, they start to see you differently, as a person, not just a mother. At that moment, the loudspeaker announced the boarding call for the flight to Boise. Margaret stood up, picking up her suitcase. This is my bus, she said. It was nice talking to you, Doris. Good luck to you, with your son and with your new life. Thank you, I said sincerely. You've been a great help to me, more than you know. Margaret smiled goodbye and headed for the platform, and I remained seated, immersed in my new thoughts, to live my life, to find something that brought joy, not try to control Garrett's life. It sounded like a challenge, and maybe a solution. When they announced boarding for my bus, I stood up, grabbed my bag, and headed for the exit with renewed determination. I didn't know if I could ever repair my relationship with my son. I didn't know if he would forgive me for my meddling, for exposing Merritt publicly. I didn't know if he would ever want me back in his life again. But I knew one thing. I would no longer live only his life. I would find my own way, my own interests, my own happiness. And maybe someday Garrett would see that I had changed, that I respect his choices, his decisions, that I can be not only a controlling mother, but an understanding, supportive person in his life. And in the meantime, I had a long drive home and a lot of time to think about what I wanted my life to be. Not the life of Garrett's mother, but the life of Doris Hammond, a woman with many more years, many more opportunities, many more roads ahead of her.